34 years ago tonight, Bill Graham, the rock promoter, the best of all time, was the guest on Later with Bob Costas, May 13th, 1991. He had his fingers in that Doors movie and that Oliver Stone directed. And so they started off talking about Morrison and the Doors, and morphed into Hendrix, which morphed into Bob Dylan, the best, the greatest, no doubt, my favorite. Look at the channel, tons and tons and tons and tons of Bob Dylan and Dylan covers and whatnot. He also talks about Neil Diamond. Last Waltz and all that, and I think he had his fingers in Neil Diamond too. And I don't mean in a Harvey Weinstein way. No. In a Bill Graham way. Money, money, money.
Ladies and gentlemen, a man who doesn't play guitar, but he gives great stadium. Please welcome Mr. Bill Graham.
I want to thank you for this award, and I hope to God you take care of each other. Thank you.
Thanks for staying up later. Bill Graham is with us tonight from Los Angeles. There's no counting how many rock concerts he's produced and promoted through the years with groups like the Stones and Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead, and with Dylan and Neil Young and Jimi Hendrix and Otis Redding, and the list goes on and on. Let's start, though, with something that's presently on people's minds, and that's the Doors movie. You're not too pleased with the way that came out, are you?
No, I'm sorry to say.
Is it untruthful to Jim Morrison's life, to the truth of the Doors, or it's only a partial truth? What's the problem with it?
That's hard to talk about, because I've tried to keep that side private. I think the wrong decision was made. And my hope from the beginning had been to use the Doors as a catalyst and tell their story and tell Jim's story, but more than that, really give the public an idea to some degree of what that era was all about. Not getting that is the biggest creative mistake of my life.
You get a producer's credit on the film, true?
Right.
But you wish you could erase it entirely?
No, I'd rather just apologize to some people that I gave my word to, that certain things wouldn't be done the way they were done. I'm just sorry that I was weak at the time. The only depressed time I've ever experienced in my life was in that time period for some other reason, but it affected my my energy level and my thought capacities to some extent, and I wasn't as strong-minded and strong-willed as I usually am about any project of that scope, and it meant a great deal to me. I made a mistake, and I let it go the wrong way, and what we didn't get was the joy and the hope of those times, and today's youth, through that picture, will not get what I hoped they would get through that picture.
Why was the project entrusted to you from the beginning?
There was a lot of confusion in Hollywood with who had the rights and how to get the rights and who was connected to the rights. And it got down to the certain family members on both sides of the two individuals, Pam and Jim. And Jim had said, members of the Doors had said things about the way we did business with them in those days, so that the attorneys many years ago, 5, 6 years ago, called me, said, would I intercede in speaking to both sides?
And they trusted you?
And I did, correct.
And that was transmitted to their heirs?
Correct. And as a result of that, we were able to put the project into motion. By that time, there were other directors that I had approached that I thought were right for this project. Timing was off. And then someone of Oliver's great stature came along, and I weakened.
The problem here isn't that there isn't a lot of truth in Stone's depiction, but only that it's one slice of the truth and not the whole thing. Is that right?
there's too much excess of all the negative aspects of those lives. But where is the hope and the light? If there was anything that was there, prominent every day, 66, 67, 68, for the first time, to the best of my recollection, this massive civilization truly believed that they were involved with attempting positive change, to be involved with affecting that, and that they could, that there was sincere hope. Where was it?
What about Jim Morrison as a person was missing?
I didn't really get to know the inner machinations of the guy. What I do know is that he talked a lot about the war. And he talked about the difficulties of, as he put it, being an involuntary leader, and realizing that no matter what he did, later on when he became a success, he talked more about how difficult it is that you seek fame and then it just blares at you all the time. You can't get away from it, you can't hide from it. And the pressure that was on him, and Frankenstein took over. You know, he built this image on stage, and his was very, very different than anyone else of that time, except to some extent Jimi Hendrix. But it got to a point where Jim had to deal with the reality that every man out there envied him, and every woman wanted him. No question.
Was his sexual magnetism as great on stage as anyone you've ever seen, including Elvis, including anybody?
Or far greater in the sense of reeking of sensuality as it relates to that fan out there. And you would look at the fan and you look at that relationship. There was Otis Redding, who's the best thing I'd ever seen, the best man ever on stage, bar none. It's on talent and sensuality. But he's black, and therefore it wasn't the same as with Jim.
Wasn't as accessible to the larger audience.
Otis Redding and Jimi Hendrix were the first two black guys that white women didn't realize they just showed themselves. They just couldn't help it. The color barrier was broken. It was a great thing to see that white women checking them out the way they did. But Morrison was something special in the sense of the way he moved, in a very sensual, serpentine way. The first woman that I fell in love with on the screen I've been in love with all my life. It was Ava Gardner. She moved from one side of the room to the other like no other woman I'd ever seen. Rita Hayworth came close, but Jim Morrison was my Ava Gardner in that sense. And that's the part of him that added to the writing talent and the singing talent, is what really made him different.
Another movie with rock and roll at its heart is The Last Waltz, the band's last concert. There's an interesting story about Bob Dylan, who apparently was a reluctant soldier when it came to this one. How'd you convince him to do it?
We did it at Winterland in San Francisco, but we went once that Beyond had it as a Thanksgiving dinner and served 5,000 people a full-course Thanksgiving meal, and then moved the tables away and had waltz music, and then the show went on. And Bob was in the second half, and there was an intermission, and I was asked to come to the back in a hurry, and then Robbie Robertson, the guitar player, said, "Bill, my God, Bob has changed his mind at the last minute. The wind isn't blowing in the right direction. He's changed his mind, as artists will from time to time, and he's decided he doesn't want to be filmed." So I went into Bob's room, and he didn't want to be filmed. He just changed his mind. But I knew that for Martin was filming, and Bob was the key to the film. He's Bob Dylan, the best there is. And Scorsese was somewhat beside himself. And I said, fine, no problem. And Robbie and the rest of the people, they were very much concerned. This great film crew standing by, and then the instructions went out not to film. I said, fine, just let Bob go on stage. When I went on the stage and introduced Bob, then went to one side of the stage and just went over to the guy. And they had assigned a guy to stand with the cameraman at each position. And I just went over to each one of these guys and just raised my voice rather high, as I would, or become somewhat garrulous in my approach. And the guy just went free froze, and I said, "You roll," in just somewhat authoritative fashion. And then I went to each one of the positions and just did the same thing.
Did you just figure that in the end, if the concert went all right, you could talk Dylan into it later?
It's not for me to talk him into it. Bob Dylan, for me anyway, is the single greatest poet our industry has ever produced. And on a given night when he's on, just with his guitar and his words, there is no one. Why, the worst that could happen is that they would destroy the film and he would never talk to me again. What's he going to do to me? Not play for me? That's okay. I mean, it's a privilege to present Bob Dylan anytime. But look at the situation. How can you not go for that? How many shots like that do we have at capturing magic?
What is it at this point with Dylan as a performer? I get the feeling that given the body of work and the transcendent brilliance of his best stuff, and when you talk about his best stuff, you're talking about a list of dozens and dozens of songs, and then given that mysterious personality, that sometimes he can go out there and deliver a performance which, if we could really analyze it, would be subpar for him, but people can't tell the difference anymore because they figure, hey, it's Dylan. I'm supposed to like it. And his every quirkish mannerism I'm supposed to perceive as some sort of off-center brilliance, and maybe it is. It's just it's too puzzling for everybody out there, so they figure just to be in his presence it must be a five-star thing.
I tell you, a few years ago, we were in Verona, Italy, in an amphitheater. It was magical. We sang outdoors 3 hours. But when we were in Europe, before we would hit a town, I would get the readout from the computer from CBS and say which songs were the biggest in which country. And in Italy, the big song was Tambourine Man. They loved Tambourine Man. And he did the whole show, and he did it in encore reluctantly, but he hadn't done Tambourine Man. I finally said, Bob, they're still out there. Just give him Tambourine Man. Didn't happen. And the headline in the paper the next day was, Bob Dylan, brilliant, made us cry, made us weep, made us think about the past, but he didn't play Tambourine Man. The second night, halfway through the set, he plays Tambourine Man. 18,000, or most of the 18,000 people lit their matches and sitting there. And you look at the audience's faces. They were in heaven on earth. They were in heaven on earth. That's Bob Dylan.
See, with this guy, it isn't just the work, it's the attitude. Of course, the attitude is inseparable from the work, but it would be, from a distance, I would think that even other musicians who are certifiably great, have to defer to this guy because he struck the tone. In 63 or 64, he struck a tone that everybody else judged perfect pitch by subsequently.
The guy had that motorcycle accident and came back out to do a national tour in '74. We were very fortunate. We did the whole tour, promoted around the country. After the first few cities, we realized that something happened in Like a Rolling Stone. And every time you got through a chorus, how does it feel to be on your own? Every time the audience just got into that more. And the fifth time around, by the fourth or fifth chorus, in every city, everybody just stood up and took big breaths. And then, so what we started doing is just lighting the room up, so that everybody saw everybody. Well, I've never seen anyone do that, ever. Every city, on that song and two or three others, when he came out with his just an acoustic guitar in the second half and just played Just Like a Woman. There isn't a person in that crowd that wasn't back to, when I heard that song, I was with Sam. He had a Jeep we used to go to. Well, in that sense, he's the king for me, and he's the king for so many. And it's sad that today's fans don't even know who he is. That's the sad part. He's still out there. He's still working. Too many of them, he's not important enough to.
An interesting thing in The Last Waltz is the presence of Neil Diamond. Now, I know why, because he and Robbie Robertson were friends, and Robbie Robertson produced a Neil Diamond album.
Correct.
But it seems out of place because he is not of that culture.
Right.
And I've seen the movie a few times, and one time I saw it on a college campus. And when Diamond appeared, a large portion of the crowd booed and hissed because they figured that this guy represents everything that this should not be about. I felt badly for Diamond because I think there's an artistic portion of his talent. I think it's drowned beneath Barry Manilow stuff half the time, but I do think in the 60s and early 70s there was an artistic portion of his talent, and he was trying to certify it by being there, was the way I saw it, but it didn't work.
He came as a friend, really, and he had the guts to walk in there. He's a very bright man. Neil is Brooklyn smart, and he has a very wonderful timbre in his voice. And he has his early songs were wonderful songs.
I really like him.
Yeah, I like Neil Diamond. I like Barbra Streisand. I'm a big Sinatra freak. But he came really as a friend, and also you sit Neil down away from his scene for who he is. He'll talk straight with you. He's fine. He just doesn't dress like the other guy, or the other guy doesn't dress like him either.
So it was no problem for him to be up there with Dylan or Van Morrison or Neil Young?
None whatsoever. And we just did a thing with an earthquake, a whole bunch of earthquake benefits up there. Now we wanted to get somebody from outside the scene to give it some potency in the commercial world. And out of nowhere, we came up with the name of Bob Hope. And Bob Hope came up by helicopter. We took him to 3 different places in one day where we were doing these fundraisers. And when he walked into that backstage area, every rock and roll star in every place that he went was in absolute awe of who he was. I mean, what was David Crosby's classic when this Bob Hope with Jimmy Graham Nash? He says, "Bob effing Hope, man," because he just went too far. And my God, well. Rock and rollers don't know who they are to the other side, and that side doesn't know who they are to the rock and roll side.
If you saw Neil Diamond in concert, 1969, 1970, as I did, now he wasn't part of what Woodstock was about or what people thought was essential and what was happening then, but he had a tremendous concert presence. He could really deliver those songs. They were very catchy. They lifted the audience right up out of their seats, and he had that distinctive and powerful voice. This is before he went in that sort of Barbra Streisand direction. He was still a pop rock guy then, and I thought he just got caught in a time warp where critics and whatnot weren't paying attention to that kind of music, and he never got the credit he was due.
The world also divided around that same time. All of a sudden, here was this huge rock world, and the rest was the pop world.
Right.
When he sang Solitary Man, he was the Marlboro Man to me. He was Jack Armstrong, and he became a hero to what was considered the straight world because you weren't straight and hip. And he dressed on stage showbiz. He put on his high Gotkas and the silk jacket, you know, and it's great. He was a showman. He was Las Vegas and he's great. His fans love Neil Diamond.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have to sell 3 records. Then he will do 5, 6 shows. He'll do 75,000 people.
He sells out like that.
Yeah. Down here, he sold like 15 forums, you know. Huge star. Women think he's a wonderfully looking man, and they have aspirations and dreams about him, and men want to be him. On the straight side of what Jim Morrison did to his fans. No difference.
Accommodations furnished by the Universal City Hilton and Towers. Make your next stay in Los Angeles a memorable one with our spacious rooms, international cuisine, and the attention of a friendly, experienced staff.
Time's up for now, but you knew this was coming. We're inviting Bill Graham to come back tomorrow night with stories about Woodstock and the early days at the Fillmore in San Francisco, Live Aid and Lenny Bruce, Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, whatever else we can cram into half an hour. Hope to see you 24 hours from now. Actually, 23 and a half. See you later.